Hi.
Hello. Welcome to Hot Pot Talks as part of the panel series for Bitter Orientals, Yellow Peril Unmasked. My name is Jen Sunshine here with my dear friend and longtime creative partner, David Ng. And together we are the co-artistic directors of Love Intersections, a media arts collective that produces intersectional and intergenerational film and artwork from underrepresented communities. We're also founding members of the Vancouver Artists Labor Union Cooperative, also known as Value Co-op, which is an artist-run worker cooperative whose goal is to provide flexible living wage income for artists. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that we are gathered here today from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Part of our work as labor activists and queer artists on unceded territories means working in solidarity with ongoing Indigenous struggles for sovereignty, decolonization, reparations, and land back. Hapa Talks emerged during the pandemic from our collaborations with the Lim Association in Chinatown, historically a neighborhood of Chinese railroad laborers who were brought to settle Indigenous territories as part of the ongoing colonial project.
So why Hot Pot Talks? As Jen mentioned, we're both part of Value Co-op, which is located in the Lim Sai Hor Khao Mak Association building, a benevolent association building in Chinatown. And when we moved into that studio, we were really intentional and thinking about about the role of artists and that have played in the neighborhood. Some of it not as good too. We're thinking about the role of artists in terms of gentrification in the neighborhood. And so over the past 2 years, we've done. Been thinking about how we could build reciprocal relationships in the neighborhood, and so Hot Pot Talk grows out of this 2-year collaboration with the Lim Association. The past 2 years in particular have brought to the surface already existing yellow peril narratives, reemerging again during the pandemic. We've seen Chinatown towns and elders targeted by racial violence and vandalism. We've seen the rise of boba liberal organizing around Stop Asian Hate, demands for hate crime legislation, which is pro-police, pro-surveillance, and harms Black and Indigenous communities. We've seen gentrification eating away at the souls of Chinatowns and other BIPOC communities, seemingly with no end in sight. We are bitter, bitter Orientals indeed. The title, Bitter Orientals, Yellow Peril Unmasked, grows from the engaging Chinatown work that we've been doing with the association, as well as our own organizing on issues related to anti-Asian racism. This panel series will touch on themes of diaspora, xenophobia, systemic racism, intersectional solidarity building, and Chinatown futurities.
I want to thank our incredible team of Ava and Cameron who helped make Hot Pot Talks a reality. So without further ado, we are so excited to introduce our two guests today. Umang and Antariksh Sagar is a queer, gender-expansive creator on a journey of practicing embodied loving possibilities. They are a film producer and podcaster interested in how QT BIPOCs channel their magic to create new worlds. They are the creator and host of Possibilities podcast, currently in development on a couple TV projects, and the lead facilitator of POV Film's Envision Lab. Welcome, JP and Umang.
Hey
Hi,
guys!
Hi. Welcome to Hoppa Talks, you two.
very excited to be on.
Yeah.
Same. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, how are you guys doing?
Good. It's Friday. I'm at the university. It's the middle of the semester, first week back. So with everything that's happening in the world, all of that is also happening. So I think I'm okay considering all of that. How are you all?
I'm doing good. I'm very jealous of all your backgrounds because I'm in the midst of a move, and so usually I feel like design is important to me. So, but anyway, I'm doing good. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be in conversation with y'all.
Cool. Well, I thought maybe, moving. I thought maybe why don't we start with that? Because when we in our original conversation, JP and Umang, JP, you've spent a significant amount of time in Toronto. Umang, you've just moved from Toronto.
Yeah.
Maybe we could start with that question. Jen and I had a question of, and maybe we'll start with Umang, because Umang, you shared with us that you've come, like you didn't just, "Oh, I'm coming to Vancouver," right? Like there was a personal journey or thought process. Yeah, what brought you here?
I mean, I think the initial was like, let's go somewhere. I wanted to go to the ocean. I mean, for the longest period, I mean, so Umang, Antariksh, Sagar. Sagar means ocean. And I've been like kind of
Mm.
craving, I mean, and you know, I've been to other places with the ocean and I feel a sense of kinship. And I think maybe it was the pandemic kind of broke me and, or it was just like I had been wanting to be closer to the water, be closer to the ocean. And so when I did come here, I came here just to like see what happened, and I ended up finding that I didn't come here knowing that I was going to move, but I came here within and then the more I stayed, but I was open to the idea. I think I was open to the idea of exploring a new place to stay, and the more stayed, the more I wanted to stay. The more I knew that there was something here that was ready to transform me, and there was an experience worth having. And I think I mean, still in the midst of it. But I had some really beautiful experiences. I stayed here for like I think 5-6 months last year before I went back and forth and finally moved. Um, and in those months, I think I kept having these experiences of uh, like deep satisfaction. I felt like there was so much that I was carrying in the busyness of the city or like the hub that I kind of dropped in a way that both expanded my expanded my sense of possibilities, expanded my sense of creative visioning, and expanded my, just like ease in life. I feel like there was sometimes in the city, sometimes in Toronto, sometimes you forget that you're in nature or you're part of nature. And I think
Mm.
there was just something about that. Someone I consider a teacher, uh, Alexis Pauline Gumbs calls herself a love evangelist, and in some of the work that she does, she talks about June Jordan's saying, "Love is life force." And if we look at everything around us and witness the life force in that, what if we? And so I think I just had like a lot of moments of like witnessing the life force of the ocean, witnessing the life force of the trees. It was so lush and blooming, and I couldn't avoid it. Maybe I
Mm.
I
Mm.
avoided it somewhere back when I was in Toronto, and then or even in the mountains, just like life is happening, even if it's still and quiet and not something that I can experience, and also to see something so much bigger than me. Anyway,
Mm.
I felt like there was just so much in that I think I dropped a lot of the things that I was carrying, or a lot of the things
Mm.
I was like exhausted by. Maybe it was just pandemic. Maybe it was longer than that. There was just a lot of things that I felt. So anyway, all those reasons why I feel like I took my time deciding, but
Mhm.
I think I was just like, this is going to change me, because love changes you. And so I
Mm.
feel like this is going to change me, and this is a change that I want to experience.
Mm.
And I think that's why I'm here.
I love that. JP, how about you? What was your journey like? Because you grew up in the Lower Mainland, right? And then you went to Toronto. What drew you back? Um,
Yeah, in a manner of speaking. I mean, I grew up in the Philippines. I was born in the Philippines, and my family immigrated to Canada when I was 13, 14, if I remember my dates correctly. And we moved as a family to Burnaby in Greater Vancouver. Um, that was middle of high school, and then I did my undergraduate degree here, and then moved to Toronto for grad school. When I moved to Toronto for grad school, wanted I knew I needed a change, at least partly from my kind of suburban nuclear family life. As a queer person, I also knew that I wanted a little bit of adventure, right? So that was what drew me away from Vancouver. I did a lot of growing up in Toronto, not only academically with grad school, but also politically. I got to know a lot of amazing folks there, activists, organizers in the community, came to be part of these spaces, which was great. Um, but then I also, wanted to come back to Vancouver because family is here,
mhm.
and I was lucky enough to have been given the opportunity to um, have a postdoctoral fellowship at UBC.
Mm.
So I thought that was a 2-year gig, but I've been able to extend that. As a faculty member, I was hired to continue on here at UBC, and I count myself lucky to be able to be in a space that I call home, close to family, which I know is not ideal for everyone, but
Mhm.
is that proximity is something that I value. And I also want to be very thankful and acknowledge that it's the academic job market is not the best these days, and so to have a permanent job
Don't scare me.
in I'm sorry, David. I'm sorry. We're working on it. But it's, I gotta steal you for the world to academia, and that is part of it. And so I'm lucky to have this permanent position in a department that I like, a little bit of an oasis in an otherwise difficult universe, institution, but also broader universe. It's not perfect, and there's a lot to be said about the challenges of being here in the body that I occupy. But I am very glad to be here in this space. Yeah, it's a little bit of home, and for a diasporic person, that is a complicated question.
Yeah.
What home is, and this is one of them for sure.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good place for us to jump into the theme of today's hot pot talks, because I think when I think about people, the experience of diaspora here, and I've only lived in one other place. I lived in Cape Town for a while. That was a very, very different experience to be, of coming from Vancouver, where there's even in like Western grocery stores, for example. This is sort of the biggest culture shock for me, because I just realized that moving to Cape Town, like 99% of the vegetables that I ate are Chinese vegetables. And you go to Superstore and they have they have gailan, they have napa cabbage, they have all of those things. And so I'm curious. I'm curious about your guys' experience. I don't know. It sounds a bit general to say of diaspora, but I'm just thinking about that experience compared to Toronto, for example. What's that sort of? What are the textures of that experience? The differences? Because I even feel like I only visit Toronto, but it's a very different energy to be a Chinese person, for example. Yeah.
I should spell out the theme of the Hot Pot Talks today. Like the actual titles is Inscrutable, Orientals, Asian Diasporic Intimacies, and the Intersections of Cultural Identity. Just want to spell it out so we can hear it.
JP, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I can go first. I'm really interested in the ways that Toronto and Vancouver are really quite different to me because of the different web of social relations that I am in each of these spaces. I tend to associate Vancouver with family because most of my family, both immediate and extended, is in this part of the world, and somehow psychologically also, like being on the Pacific Ocean and the connection to the Philippines. I feel closer to the kind of global network of family when I'm here. It's significant to me. The pandemic really made it very clear to me that I'm glad I'm here close to family. I think the experience of the pandemic would be really quite different if I was in Toronto. Partly because my parents are in service jobs, in lines of essential work. And so particularly near the beginning of the pandemic, I worried and continue to worry about them. I think that experience would be really quite different if I was in Toronto. Toronto is a different kind of familial space, a different kind of chosen familial space. It's a different kind of community feel, and my embeddedness in organizing and other kinds of political community were a bit more robust in Toronto. So not that they don't exist here, they exist here for sure. But as a student living on my own, and also this was my research too, is community organizing. Like I was really embedded there, and these are racialized migrant communities also. So that was a different lens from which to view what it means to be a diasporic person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what came to mind for me with your question.
Nice.
Umang?
Yeah, I mean, I really think, I mean, I'm still getting to know Vancouver, so it's hard for me to actually talk about the community connection here. What does it feel like to land here? Because I think, especially in community, it's something that I'm still figuring it out, and I'm still new, and I'm learning. But I do agree with JP in saying when in his reflections on Toronto, which is really robust, really tight knit. Oftentimes, I'm surprised we didn't cross paths there, JP, because I feel
I
like
know, me
we
too.
we'll have a lot of overlap in community and in activist spaces, and and community spaces of a particular type, and art spaces of a particular type. I mean, I think one of Toronto's really beautiful strengths, one of the many strengths, is its cultural art, activist spaces, radical art spaces, community art spaces, and I mean, some of the things that was really hard about the pandemic was how that was taken away from us, and places that really, the kinds of events that nourish or that kind of give the most exciting purpose of being there were, I mean, hopefully we'll see what happens, how things are going to come back. And I know it's exciting. BLM has gotten a Wild Seed Center now. And so I'm really curious about what that opens up in the city. There's lots of beautiful things in terms of community. And also sometimes, it was also sometimes exhausting. and I feel like I felt ready for a change. But being away also has made me miss it. Also, being away also made me miss those connections and miss the kind of work that's happening. And but I don't know if that's connected to your question. I've lost track of the question a little bit. But as a diaspora, I mean, okay, to connect it back to diaspora and diasporic experiences, I do feel one of the things that because I've lived in many more places. I grew up in Abu Dhabi. I have family there. I've been in India for many years. I have very close friends and relationships there, and many of my close friends from. I mean, I have a lot of friends who have experience like mine, which is growing up in one place, coming to Toronto, finding community, and then sometimes moving, sometimes finding that new experience, new journey, whether it's for a job, whether it's some other reason. I think what I share, or what are the conversations that sustain me in that, is that home is the journey that we're in, and I think this, I find that the adventure of it is the journey is the destination, and I think I'm experiencing that's how I process home sometimes. Is that it's not something going. Because I might be going lots of places in different times and different periods, but in this moment, in myself, am I at home? Am I feeling expanded? Am I learning something? Am I feeling at peace? And the connections that I'm carrying with me in that, and that is, I think, because I think one of the other things that I think the pandemic has shifted, or like even the kind of ideas of permanence or ideas of change, things will always be a particular way. So much of that has broken down, and more than I think I always knew that change was always a thing in life. As a non-binary person, as someone who's gone through many changes and shifts in my own lifetime, I've experienced that. But I think there was something extra about the pandemic that was saying, even home, even ideas of home, because I felt like I had kind of built a permanence around home in Toronto, and I felt okay, I can actually let this go for now, and I can experience something new, and I can be okay in it.
Umang, I'd be curious to hear more about your journey from outside of Canada. Like you spoke of growing up in Abu Dhabi. I'm very curious about, because one of the themes that I'm seeing overarching is that I first of all, I love that we started this conversation with with moving and the natural connections to like migration patterns, to queers choosing to go somewhere where they can find belonging, or they find belonging in the places they migrate to. And there is like this theme of water. You cited water as like one of the reasons of being called to Vancouver, and water being. I'm from the island of Taiwan as well, which is very close to the Philippines, and so this like and writing the current of that water is something that I'm seeing this kind of pattern kind of emerging. But yeah, I would love to learn more about what your experience was like growing up outside of Canada.
I mean, I think it's in me. One of the things that I mean, in some of my coming of age or like re-coming of age in Toronto, because I feel like queer journey has been with me my whole life, whether I name it such or not, whether I understood, whether I had the language, whether I understood it or not. And I think one of the things that I have been thinking or thought about, and but even when I was in Toronto, was that I don't live in just one place. I have family in Abu Dhabi. I'm part of the community there. I have very close friends who live in India who I see every so often. Those things are not, it's not broken for me. It's not something that I have left behind and now I'm new here. And I think that's an important way for me to feel whole, because I think one of the challenges, one of the things that I living here is there are whole parts of me that maybe only some people could understand, or maybe not everyone can understand. But maybe not everyone has to, because I have places where I can hold those pieces. And so, I mean, that's how I understand it in this moment. It's like I can have the connections, the deep connections, relevant deep connections in different places in different ways. And so, growing up, in Abu Dhabi and in India, and queerness is very much illegal. In Abu Dhabi, in UAE, and India, it's, I guess, now legal-ish, whatever. It's better than before, but not when I was and so really having to there's a lot of beauty. I got to experience culture deeply. I feel like I don't feel a sense of breakage with my relationship with it sometimes, and maybe this is me speaking out of turn, but sometimes when I meet folks who first, second generation, there's like maybe a sense of breakage from familial connections. I don't feel that. I feel very deeply that I have experienced community, connection, culture growing up. I feel a lot of, I miss it. I miss the version of me that's there sometimes. I miss the version of me that comes out in spaces where have those pieces of me. But I also feel like I am of this place now. I have experienced this place, and I have grown and learned and made myself here. And so, and I think the part of like growing up somewhere else is like where essential parts of me could not live openly, or they could have, but it wasn't there in my community and my support system at that time, at least. And I think I think so much of the journey about coming here has been choosing to or it was a call to experience, or to move the shame out of it, or move the kind of blockages out of it, to kind of pick, not that it doesn't come up again and again, like those pieces will still, if they lived in you once, they're going to find their way to show up again in you again and again. But this time I feel the opportunity, the kind of learning, the possibility to embody myself more deeply, and at the same time I also know that I don't have to be any one thing. I can make my sense of self, my sense of queerness, my sense of gender and possibility doesn't have to look any one way, and it can't look any one way, because I have come from lots of different places, and all of that lives in me. So I think it's being okay with the liminal, that I think all those things, and being okay with making it. I mean, sometimes it's not the funnest journey, but I think it is the most joyous one in the end. At the end of the day, to be able to own your own journey, and to be able to hold those different parts of myself, and I seek to do that, and I seek to be on that learning. And I think there's so many beautiful things about Abu Dhabi. There are so many beautiful ways I experience community. There's so many beautiful things about India. I miss my friends. We're in connection all the time. And then there has been things that I could only have experienced, or that I did get to experience in Toronto, and now here. And so I'm grateful. I'm grateful to get the chance, the opportunity to have those connections ongoing, and have this lifetime to change and grow in the ways that I have a chance to.
Yeah, what's coming to mind from what we're hearing from you guys is I'm thinking of like places where where in our organizing, or since Jen and I have started Love Intersections, where we've also encountered stories, diasporic queer stories that and what we've been able to, what conversations and what organizing we've been able to do. Like, I'm just thinking, Jen, so many of the film festivals that we get get
Yeah.
into. There's quite a few of them in Europe that are specifically queer minority film festivals,
Yeah.
and and we've had the honor and privilege of being able to travel to some of these festivals, and it was very interesting. I think quite a few times where we share the story of why we started Love Intersections, of wanting to be at the beginning increase representation of queer people of color, and then having all of these other queer people of color filmmakers starting film festivals or making films for the same reasons, right? And of course it's the ways that takes shape in different parts of the world is quite different. But it's
And the
yeah.
focus that the focus, let's say, in a post-screening Q&A with filmmakers with us, the focus of topic is often very, very different from one city to another. So one would assume that the queer kind of the coming out story is perhaps often a very prominent one. Other countries is the focus is on non-binary and transness and that intersection with the culture there. I'm thinking specifically, David, with the experience you had in Japan when you attended the festival there.
Yeah, that was a very specific. We showed our 6x6, which is a finding
Short
untold.
series.
Yeah, a finding untold queer stories, and it was very interesting because we spent the entire hour and 40 minutes talking about turfs,
Whoa.
because that was something that they really wanted to talk about.
Mhm.
Yeah, transgender exclusionary radical feminists. And then and then I remember, whereas like when I took that series, or not the series, but another set of films to Pakistan, and it was the entire time we spent talking about accessibility, right? And so it was it was really interesting, the sort of of course it's obvious how it is, art is received by audiences in different ways, but it's interesting as a filmmaker, right? You don't always, of course, make that. We didn't make that film. I don't know, remember how even the turf conversation came up, but the audience receives it in the way that they're going to. JP, I kind of want to put you on the spot, because Jen and I yesterday were reading an article in the book
Diasporic Intimacies.
Diasporic Intimacies. Yeah. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about that book and your writing in that book, and particularly like what do we mean, what in the context of what you guys were writing, rather than have Jen and I say what we think we read. We'll hear it straight from you.
So Diasporic Intimacies is really a labor of love. It was edited by Robert Diaz, Marissa Largo, and Fritz Pino. And they really centered queer perspectives and bodies of knowledge in all senses of that phrase in the book. And it is at least partly a corrective to Filipinx Canadian scholarship that has not adequately dealt with questions of gender and sexuality in its framing. And I am implicated in that insofar as I have Diasporic Intimacies up there, that kind of book. Filipinos in Canada is a book that I edited almost 10 years ago now, actually almost exactly 10 years ago. And even as a queer person, two of the editors of my book are queer, at least two. But we didn't censor sexuality, perspectives that are queer in that book. And so Robert, Marissa, and Fritz rightly decided that this needs to be front and center, because quite a lot of critique around Filipinx Canadian studies and questions of diaspora require that perspective, in part because there is sometimes a tendency in scholarship and activism by migrant and diasporic communities to engage in a politics of inclusion. And some of that politics of inclusion require being in proximity to normative definitions, for example, of respectable intimacy and family. In order to belong, one must prove to normative structure, say of government or community, that one is respectable enough, right? Like
I
to
also
be engaged in nuclear family, that kind of thing, right? Jen,
JP, I also really appreciated the definition, like spelling out that the understanding of queerness here is not an identitarian of the subjectivity of that, of being gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, that it
that's
is
part of it.
more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
It's some of that is there, but it cannot be the be all and end all of queer. And the lessons that I've learned quite a lot around that definition of queer, requiring more expansiveness, comes from Black feminist theorists, and including and especially Kathy Cohen, who in a classic piece called Punks, Bull Daggers, and Welfare Queens. This was a 1997 piece in the journal GLQ, argues that for particularly Black folks, being straight has never been normative. We cannot possibly understand the straight Black single mother as a heteronormative subject, given how thoroughly demonized as a figure she has been in policy and media conversations. And so, if we're going to think about heteronormativity, we also need to account for issues of class and race. Into our definitions of heteronormativity, because heteronormativity and heterosexuality are not the same. So that is one that energizes the chapter that I wrote in Diasporic Intimacies, and apply some of the energy and insight from these theorists, Kathy Cohen particularly, to the case of Filipinx Canadian studies. Where forced family separation by effect of policy, like the caregiver program that forces separation of parents from children, particularly women and mothers from children. This kind of compulsory deviance, to draw from the work of Judy Wu. Right, that is a queer condition. Right, that would not be captured if we only focus on gay, lesbian, bi. Right, so there's a queerness there around the politics of sexuality that requires that more expansive view.
It's funny. This is, I mean, Jen, you and I often talk about this because we started Love Intersections actually in our minds, like needing to center race. So we only talk about. I'm finding myself for a very long time, Jen. You and I were always just it's race, 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 and it was actually through doing my comprehensive exams where I really and that whole process of thinking about what we're doing is exactly this, what you were just describing, JP, about this thinking about queerness a little bit more expansively than just sexuality. Because Jen, when we've struggled sometimes when we've started writing grants and stuff like that, like, right, how do we write about queerness thinking about sexuality, but thinking about pushing ourselves to think about
I would say, in our approach to these grant writing, we obviously cater to the funders' own kind of language. So it necessarily needs to be this identitarian LGBTQ plus, this kind of rhetoric. But the approach that we have to crafting this grant, I would say, is very queer. So those knowing, if they were to read this grant and they were to look in between the lines, they would be able to figure out this is like a very queer tactic that they're employing. I think.
That's powerful. That's something I read about in that chapter, is that a queer method requires having to fill in the gaps, maneuvering.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But I
I
also
love
wanted
that.
to engage, if I could, I wanted to engage.
Please.
I love what you said, JP, in so many different ways of like the deviance of queerness. Essentially, is that there's that is essential. That's very essential to queerness. Is like breaking apart the kind of normativity that we understand is, and I think in LGBTQ culture, normativity has come in, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
and so the queerness part lies in the deviance, lies in the breaking. And as someone who lived in other places, I've last year or whatever 2 years ago, I can't remember the time is anymore.
What is time?
Yeah.
My favorite question.
Truly a cosmic joke. But I read this book called The Histories of Desire in India. And I really recommend it as a book. It's written by a queer author who lived in the West and then went back to India. And I think one of her reflections was how limited ideas of sexuality have become. And she writes these histories of queerness and desire and sexuality that are so expansive. And it was really freeing for me, both as someone from the same place that she writes about, and as just a queer person to know that desire and love and possibility and queerness and and values don't have to be just a limited set of things that we've decided are the right thing and the wrong thing, the normative thing.
Right.
Anyway, so I think there's like so much in what you were saying that really I really appreciated, JP, because I was like, yeah, that's exactly, queerness is so much more than any one of those things, and even within what we now understand as queerness, there's so much to explore beyond the normative.
Which is a shame too, because then so many of us, because of how we're implicated under that normative system, we then start replicating that within our own communities, in wielding a kind of, or weaponizing our own sexualities against each other, against us. And it's what I'm speaking of is, of course, the puritanical kind of approach to how one is a good social justice, person. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So it's, anyway, I don't know where I'm going with this. But maybe we can. I'm not spilling the tea. Maybe we can. Why don't? Because in our pre-interview, we actually started this conversation, preparing for this Hot Pot Talks, in talking about institutional failures and the kind of creativity that comes. That emerges outside of institutions, and that you don't have to look very far for community care. JP, I'm wondering if you, well, not to put you on the spot again, but
we will anyway.
But we will anyway. When we had last spoken, you said that we caught you at a very interesting time. I'm wondering if you can go more, just be intimate with us.
I don't remember what I was referring to during the pre-interview by that point, but it's probably around, being back to school in January and the anticipation of that, or at least the energy and stress that comes with the beginning of the term. This is a differently interesting time during this recording, because it's our first week back to teaching in person at UBC. With all of the stress that entails, including dealing with tech issues, for example, but also other kinds of worries around, how do we ensure that our learning community is both supportive and safe? And how do we be in a room together, those of us who can be in a room together? And there's a lot of conversations and very different multiple points of view around the wisdom of returning to in person. We don't have time to deal with all of the different often conflicting reasonings that people have around whether or not we should be in person. Where we're at is that we're in person, at least the teaching part. And this, all of this is, the last couple of years have been really quite stressful for everyone in different ways, and our different positionings, intersectionalities matter in terms of how we've dealt with the last couple of years. But on the topic of institutional failures, I think it's really quite important for us to think about what the responsibilities are of institutions like the university in these kinds of political moments, not just of the pandemic and the kind of immediate crisis that it poses, but also what that immediate crisis has made visible in terms of longer term issues around who is in place and out of place at UBC, whose interests are served, whose bodies are normalized, who is treated as disposable, who gets to be made sicker, who gets debilitated in these spaces. It is not insignificant that my, experiences, my bodily and mental experiences of anxiety and depression have spiked since becoming a faculty member at UBC. That I hold that alongside my point earlier about feeling lucky to have a permanent job in an institution in this job market. Those coexist for me. And some of that institutional failure is an effect of the durable history of the university as a white supremacist institution, where it's not meant for people like me. And so when we enter into these spaces, no wonder we feel out of place because we are, right? So that I don't remember what the question was, Jen, that you started with, but that's
institutional failures. Yeah,
that's part of it, right? I suppose what I'm saying is I feel it very immediately and intimately in my body and my mind, what it means to be in this institution, in this stress and anxiety and sleeplessness, and my shoulders aching right now.
How it shows up in my body and in my mind, and David has can attest to this just for the last 2 years. My confidence level and in how I conduct myself, how I speak, how I write has just plummeted. And one of my really good friends, Anna White, who's the camp director of Camp Out, she reminded me that because we're not physically gathering in chosen spaces with our chosen people who are able to beam back their appreciation, but also their view of you, and we're all isolated. So it makes sense that all of this would all of my insecurities emerged during the last 2 years. Started just complete self-doubt and everything that I've worked up to for 30 plus years that I felt confident in, that I felt assured in. So this is just things that I'm still currently navigating. But where was I going with this? I think I was wanting to talk. Oh yes, and if I may also share, this was before the pandemic. I was in the same institution as JP, and I worked there for a few years doing communications work. And if we're talking about institutional failures, one of the strategies that I had to it wasn't necessarily in my job description, but it was something I just came up with because I was seeing how our grad students, international grad students, who are here to have these layers, these levels where I'm navigating and dealing with. And so I would say, okay, what's up with Vancouver? First of all, I want to acknowledge your experience in Vancouver is probably strange. So let's first validate that. Then I have to validate the institutional strangeness, and then the university strangeness, the department strangeness, all of the levels that they are navigating. I learned to speak with them in a way that they then felt like they were cared after and cared for because they didn't feel it anywhere else. And so it was just something that I was like, this is my ethical responsibility to do, even though it was not necessarily in my job description to deal with students. But in any case,
now I'm getting quite fired up because now I'm thinking about how the ways I'm specifically the university and also the art system. I'm thinking of these two institutions that we navigate a lot. And Jen, you're gonna laugh because I'm gonna use the word gaslighting. It's my new thing, my new when I identify it. But all of this institutional gaslighting, and it's very, very racialized in the university, and in so many layers of the university. But I'm just like, specifically, one of the things that just enrages me every year around this time is the survey around the increase in tuition. They send this massive, it's this sort of like this survey that says, do you, all of these questions to make it sound as if they're taking care of students, and no one, what student is going to be like, oh yes, please increase my tuition during a global pandemic. But they send around this thing, but it makes it feel like, we care. And the wording too is like, we really want to center the needs of students or something like that, and all of this stuff around, care. And one more example is after the racial profiling incident last year. There's another survey around
which one?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And then they increase campus security on campus, like literally. And so, and I can give you the examples in the art world too, where, the check boxes of like, we really want this representation in the arts. They're even using the word decolonization now, right? And yet the same time and time again, we're told that our practice, our social practice as social practice artists and as racialized artists, like it's not held in the same regard as, as we know other white artists. So yeah, it's a very yeah, there's lots of frustration for me there.
Sounds like it. I mean, I love what you said, Jen, about like finding ways to navigate a system that align with your values, because otherwise you just have to live by the values of the university, but you have your own set of values to be like, okay, this is how I'm going to make it through this, is by finding the thing that makes it sustainable for me. And I think that's that I think has been an important journey for me in my exploration of how I'm going to create, is like, what actually do I want to do? What is the world I want to create? How can I experiment with it? And who are the aligned people I can experiment that creation with? Because, and I think because ultimately institutions are collective action, and it gets sustained by a variety, because of institutional backing and the sustained action to sustain them. And we, as being the change agents that we all are, we can shift how even the institutions work, or make our own institutions that we want to represent in the world. And so I think it's really beautiful what you were sharing, how you were navigating a system that doesn't have that care centered.
I'm curious, can you tell us about your podcast? And
I was just going to ask that.
And creating it, what I would be assuming is creating this platform so that you can have these types of conversations. And tell us about some of the guests that you've had on. Do you have difficult conversations?
And also the title too, because I that word possibilities. I'm curious about that.
I think maybe I'll take a step back and say, I did go to undergrad, and I did not have a really exciting experience there, and then go to film school. But I think a lot of my education, because I feel very committed to being a student of some type, but it has been outside of institutions, and so and it has been with teachers that I found deeply aligned, or that were impacting me in a way that was creating openings for me and creating possibilities for me. So the title actually came. So I'd had like some expansive experiences and some immersions in the States. I'd stayed in LA for a few months, and I'd really there was something in there that was emerging for me. And I'd come back, and I knew I wanted to have this conversation with our first guest, Adrienne Marie Brown, who I'd met a few months before that. And I think even in the first conversation, I wasn't entirely sure what the podcast was going to be about, but we recorded it, and I interviewed her, and it was great. It was a really great, fun episode. I mean, she's amazing, and I think in the process of being in conversation, I realized what the podcast was going to be, and so and the name possibilities I mean, I'm a super woo-woo person. So it came when I was like going on a walk and I just like heard it. I heard that's the podcast. It's called Possibilities Podcast. And it's called Possibilities Podcast because it's making you feel the experience of talking about this generative line of conversation with queer and trans BIPOC people who are creating worlds, shaping worlds, and making, looking beyond what we all think is possible, looking beyond, shifting our culture. Even if it's like, I think one of the things that Adrienne writes about in her book is like, have your community mile deep and inch wide. You don't have to go super wide. Sometimes you have to go really deep in your connections and in your communities to kind of create that shift and create that kind of deep bond that can actually deep trust, that can make you move to bigger pieces and bigger spaces and to make you do things that are world changing, even if if your world is like 5 people, it can change the world for 5 people. That can radiate, that can have a lot of impact. And
isn't there some go ahead, sorry. I was just saying something random about, isn't there some kind of psychology thing where you're made up of the like 5 to 7 people closest to you, or don't mind.
I guess so. I mean, I don't know if I'm talking about that, but I think I think for it's more that I think for me, it was more that ability to have like these deep conversations with people with a specific lens, which was for me how to create the world that I want to live in. Because sometimes that was a point of tension for me, feeling at discomfort. And then, as many of us may feel this, as you're expressing, JP, with the institution, this discomfort of like, yeah, I got safety in here, yeah, I got comfort in here in some ways, and yet it's not giving me what I want. It's not giving me. It is still giving me. It's exhausting me. And I think I felt that in lots of places. I was in film school just before that. I was like, this is supposed to be what I'm supposed to do so that I can do the thing that I want to do. And I do not like it at all. And it did not actually empower me to make the stories that I wanted to make, because it hindered me. And I think, I mean, it looks good on a resume when you apply for something, but I remember it as a really challenging experience in my life.
Yeah, it's something that resonated during our pre-interview. I think it was you that said, when we were talking about the shared institutional failures, I think Umang had said, we always create outside of institutional spaces, loving outside of institutions, loving beyond it, in spite of it.
That's what queerness is. I don't know. That's what queerness is. I mean, I think, well, and what is institution is not the dominant institutions of that are colonial capitalism are not rooted in love, right? We know that it can't survive. Actually, if love is the most important thing in our worlds, those institutions would not survive. And I think we're seeing so much of. Like, I was just reading the other day about how much there's like this mass quitting that is happening. People just like walking out of their jobs. I saw this thing of like a young person just quit by texting their manager, "It's giving shackled. I quit."
Amazing.
Because I was like, yeah, it's because the thing is, our work isn't exciting us, isn't breeding love in us, and that if our worlds reoriented towards that, what would happen? What would happen in our relationships if love was the most? What would happen? And freeing love, not love that like binds you down and tells you to be committed to something that's not within you, right? Love that will free you. But what would happen? And I think I'm in an exploration in my creative practice, in my work, in my podcast, in my film work. I think I'm also currently I just joined POV Film, and I'm really experiencing. And it's a crew of immigrants, like everybody, almost everyone who works there is an immigrant, which is a very Toronto thing. But I'm experiencing how much care is at the center of their practice. Care is at the center. So they are also like not a big institution, but they are also creating community and space in our nonprofit. But I can see how different it is from any other nonprofit that I've ever worked at, really, or I've been involved with, where the process and community centeredness is really strong. And the thing is, it's possible. It's not impossible to do it, and you see people drawing it every day and experimenting with it every day. But it has to be beyond caring about what the institution thinks of us, right?
Mm,
It has to be centered on what does love require of us.
mm.
Yeah, I saw a funny tweet the other day, and in regards to the mass exodus of workspaces, is the tweet was, "I think I have like 5 years of capitalism left. Like that's it. I can
Wow,
only
that's
handle like 5 more
Well,
years."
high
you know,
tolerance.
Jen, you and I had that kind of reckoning as well. You know, I mean, I love the work that we've been able to do over the past 7 years, but we also had a moment of, what is our practice in terms of thinking about queer diasporic intimacies, our own journey as artists? What are we wanting to explore? Because a
Mhm.
lot of and instead of chasing grants and deliverables so that we can patch together somewhat of a practice. We had this moment of like, I'm absolutely exhausted juggling all of these deliverables. What are we actually wanting to do as artists? And we actually went away. We went away to the exotic city of Victoria for a few days just to really spend time together, just to really think through those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that really resonated with me. I'm curious what I mean. We all have there's clearly like a overlapping interests in terms of what work we're doing. That's why we put the four of us together. I'm curious what you guys are working on next, loosely connected to this topic we've been discussing.
No.
Writing, creative. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, one of the projects I'm working on, a TV project, is by Monica Garrido, who's a Mexican Toronto-based now comedian, and the project's called The Cunning Linguist, and it's about her journey as her second coming of
Sorry,
age.
what is it called?
It's called The Cunning Linguist. Haha.
Love it. So
Amazing.
good.
Oh my God, it's hilarious, and it's really good. And so we're in development for a half-hour comedy series with her project, which is exciting because we got some good funding for that. I mean, as a starting point. And so that's one of the exciting projects. And I'm working with POV to do their film work. We're working on another season of Possibilities podcast, which I'm very excited about. And I have a couple other projects that I'm going to tease later. But it's been really exciting to. I think the reorientation for me in the last few years was like find what you really want to do, find the people you really want to do it with, and find a way to do it. And that has been what I'm practicing these days.
Thanks, Umang.
JP?
For me, there are a couple of things. I am in a really odd position, having just spent the last hour kind of talking about institutional failures. To now say that I am interim director of the Asian Canadian and Asian Migration Studies program at UBC, and that's not necessarily going against what I just said, insofar as there are spaces of possibility within that are possible within institutions. I think the kind of history of kind of critical ethnic studies, critical race theory, queer studies attests to that. Of course, it's not imperfect, and there are often limitations to what can be done. I mean, I'm the first to admit that. But in that work, as interim director of the Asian Canadian and Asian Migration Studies program, I've had the distinct pleasure of having a kind of a port side seat. Listen to me with my sports metaphor.
I love it.
To witness the amazing work being done by students of color to support each other, to uplift knowledges that are marginalized in institutions, to make connections, strong, ethical, responsible connections to community, to diversify is not even the right word, to insist that non-Western methods and knowledges and ways of knowing are not only valid but are crucial to the world. And in this role, if there's anything, I'm only in this role till the end of May. If by the end of May, I have been able to support even some of these efforts, then I will be very happy and I can say that I've succeeded in this role. So that continues. That is the exciting part of that role. There are other non-exciting parts of that role, because it means that I need to, maneuver within the institution in this administrative role. But that is also that stuff that I have to do to be able to do the other more exciting work.
Yeah.
The acquiring funding, doing paperwork, the non-exciting, sometimes soul-crushing kind of work. Is in the service of being able to do these other things that are actually, to me, really quite meaningful. And so I'm happy. Well, I'm not happy to do it, but I know I gotta do it because it makes a difference to be able to do the other stuff.
And having you there is so important, because I think for people I know for me, having people within the institution, when you're talking to somebody, even if I don't want to sit inside of it, it changes everything. To be able to have a conversation with someone who's in there doing the work, doing the hard thing of it, that maybe I don't want to do, it means everything. It makes, if I wish I was in a program with you, maybe my educational experience of university would have been different, of someone like with someone like you. And I think I really want to say it takes a lot. I mean, it may not be something that is in necessarily my path, but I really, really, really appreciate the work that you must be doing to kind of navigate it for everyone.
I appreciate that. And, I just want to say also that, part of the work of being in institutions is actually making sure that there are spaces that are not visible to the institution within the institution to be able to do the work. I think, Jen, this is partly what I was hearing you say earlier when you say you were doing work outside of your, job description to be able to support students. Many of us do that work behind closed doors, in the kind of whisper spaces, away from the prying eyes and ears of administrators, to strategize on how to exist and survive, and even sometimes to thrive. And I'm thinking here of the work of Fred Moulton and Stefano Harney around maroon spaces within the university, being in but not of the university, and what kinds of possible spaces, kind of both within but also outside the university, can exist. And I see that both in my role as administrator, but also as someone who kind of occupies this liminal space of being in, sometimes of, but not always of.
Yeah.
You can't have a conversation with four queers without the word liminal several times.
Well, JP, thank you for that reminder, though, because I'm just thinking, when I was listening to all of you speak about the institutional failures, I'm thinking about the joys that I've had of going to school, and largely, of course, working with my supervisor JP. But
wow.
But the two panel series that we've organized, like the one last year, Struggles in Places, that it really sprung up because there was four of my colleagues that we really felt so disconnected at the beginning of the pandemic and really wanted to spend time just staying connected. And so it started off as a reading group around social justice and pandemic, and then it evolved into a panel series. And then I'm just thinking, one of the things I'm really excited about, a next project too, along the same lines, is the Transformative Memory Symposium that we're organizing, called Resilient. It's a very long title. Resilient Cartographies: Everyday Strategies of Social Justice that have reemerged during pandemic times. And it's just been such an amazing, we're basically putting together panels of artists, community activists, and also interrogating art and gestures of care and community organizing. What gets to be called art? What gets to be called knowledge production? And deliberately putting together panels that sort of subvert the sort of more rigid categories of how we think about those things. And I think I'm just relating it to Hot Pot Talks too. I mean, this is sort of, Jen, this is what when we think about each season and what guests we're bringing on board. It's the similar sort of we try to, anyways, knitting together these different people that where we want to have these types of conversations, and get riled up about institutions.
And we all have our role to play, right? Like in the future, in the movement, or in the world we want to create, and wherever that is. Sometimes it's within the institution, sometimes it's outside of it. So we all have and it's all part of the magical journey that we're gonna unfold in the new world in. So.
Thanks.
Well, I think we're running close to our time.
We
But
are.
time flies. We can't leave though without asking the question we ask all of our guests, and that is, what is your favorite hot pot ingredient or experience?
I think my favorite hot pot. I mean, I'm split. I really like a good mushroom.
Yes.
An oyster mushroom, or I mean shiitake mushroom. Like I'm pretty pro mushroom, and also a fried tofu. So I'm a vegetarian, so it has on that realm. But those are my favorites.
Do you have a favorite mushroom? Because I have a favorite hot pot mushroom. It would be enoki for me.
He's good.
Okay, no, it is maybe the shiitake for me.
Nice.
Mine's not the big king mushrooms, but like the little king mushrooms.
Those are good.
The baby king?
The baby king mushrooms.
Sounds very gay.
Yes. JP, how about you?
It's tough to pick because one of the beautiful things about hot pot is there's so many things in it. That feels like a pageant answer to that question. I think bean curd sheets are underappreciated.
Yes, you're right.
And I
You're
love
right.
them. There is something about the texture. It's not that long ago that I learned how they're made, and that is also like a really fascinating process.
Oh,
how are they made?
Yeah.
I should know this, but
So I think if I watch the right video, they're the like thing that solidifies when you have soy milk like on top.
Yeah.
The sheet that kind of forms, and so it's that like you keep harvesting the sheet that forms on top of.
Cool.
So it's also really quite fascinating.
Yeah.
But
You're right.
I love them. I love the texture.
You're right. It is so underappreciated.
Yeah.
It flies under the radar, but it is so good. It soaks up so much flavor too, because it's quite thick, but it's like layered. So all the juices get in the layers, and then when you bite into it, it's like you're biting through all the layers of flavor.
Sometimes they're dangerous because like all of the hot soup is in there.
Inside.
Yes.
But no, I love them.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
That would be my answer.
Nice.
My favorite soup is a Cantonese soup called fujok tong, which is bean curd soup. It has like dried oysters and other mushrooms and other stuff like that. But yeah. Cool.
Well, thank you so much, Mon and JP. That was great.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me be part of this conversation. It's lovely chatting with you all.
Nice. Great. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Great. Thanks.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.